Okay, fantastic. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. So my name is Ellis Blaikie. I'm currently the Acting Director of Policy and Research at NCOSS. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are all living and working and dialing in from today. For me, I'm dialing in on Wongal country, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourselves as well, and also, pop whichever country you're currently dialing in from in the chat. So I thought we would start today's session, as we've started previous sessions, with giving you a bit of a refresher on sort of the background of the NGO Researchers Forum, and then just take you through what we're sort of focusing on today. So the NGO Research Forum was informally started way back in 2008 by Mission Australia and the Benevolent Society. At the time, it was a loose gathering of NGO organisations as well as other stakeholders, and it has sort of taken different shapes and forms over the years, eventually evolving into the current sort of partnership between NCOSS and the University of Sydney, which started around 2018 as sort of convening partners of the forum. So the primary aim has really sort of been unchanged over those years. It's really been to provide a forum for NGO researchers such as yourselves to present and discuss your work and strengthen evidence-informed approaches and best practice across the sector. And we relaunched or reinvigorated the NGO Researchers Forum in March this year, and through a co-design workshop to really explore what a reinvigorated forum could look like, including the top issues that were important to us. And we were very keen for this to become a space that's very much NGO-led. We, at that workshop, agreed to discuss grey research, to look at good practice examples, and to aim for capability building as well as knowledge sharing. So in terms of what we're focusing on today, one of the topics that was identified at the March planning session as an important topic that this forum might want to look at was workforce mental health as well as workforce recruitment and retention. And they were the preferred themes for today's forum. But this is obviously a very evolving area in terms of community-led research, and we didn't receive any submissions from potential presenters on these specific themes for today, which turned out to be a fantastic opportunity anyway, because we actually received a few other submissions on other themes which are just as important and interesting, and we'll be hearing about those presentations today. So if we could just go to the next slide. So this is sort of the program for today. Our first presentation will be from Ellis Blaikie from Bridge Housing about using nudge theory to deliver evidence-based program improvements. We'll then be hearing from Carrie Hayter from Health Consumers New South Wales about building the capacity of health consumers and researchers to support consumer involvement in health research. And then we'll be hearing from Laura Butler from Westeer about understanding the support system for survivors of institutional child sexual abuse, and a small-scale qualitative study of community and legal practitioners in Greater Western Sydney. So a really diverse and interesting program for today, which is fantastic. Just in terms of some very general guidelines for the presentations today, we do ask our presenters to be mindful of the time for each presentation. We've allocated about 15 minutes for each speaker to present the highlights from their project. And after all three of the presentations, will then have an opportunity as a group to discuss any key takeaways, what resonated with us the most, what potentially needs clarification, and how we could, apply some of these research approaches in our own settings or organisations. So please do, if possible, hold off any questions until all three presentations have been complete. But of course, feel free to type in any comments or questions in the chat box as we go. So I'll now hand over to Ellis Blaikie from Bridge Housing. Thanks very much, Ellis.
Thanks, Elise. All right, here we go with my screen sharing. Woohoo. Okay. There we go. Now, can everyone just see that the main slide there?
Yep, that's great. Thanks.
Fantastic. All right, great. Thank you. So yeah, I guess just before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians of the lands that we're meeting on today. For me, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. So my name's Ellis Blaikie, and I'm the Manager of Service Improvement and Innovation at Bridge Housing. And yeah, I'll be talking today about how we've been using nudge theory as a framework to deliver evidence-based service improvements across our frontline services here at Bridge. So I'll just start by, just giving you a bit of background about Bridge Housing and what we do, then just go over some of the key principles of nudge before I talk about how we have applied nudge to some of our key processes at Bridge and the results that we've seen through that. So about Bridge. So we're a tier 1 registered community housing provider operating in the Sydney region. And our mission is to improve lives through affordable housing and quality services. We've been around for almost 40 years with our humble beginnings in the Southwest Inner Sydney Housing Cooperative in 1985 with just 35 properties. And we've now grown, we've got 3,500 properties, which are home to over 5,500 residents, covering 20 local government areas across Sydney. So we're leaders in the delivery of Housing First programs. So we've got a real focus on housing people who've experienced homelessness and people with quite complex needs. So since the first lockdown in 2020, we've housed almost 100 people through, with the history of rough sleeping as part of the New South Wales government's Together Home program. We've also got the Step to Home program, through which we've housed 90 people with experiencing rough sleeping since 2018. And we've also run some of the first Housing First pilots in New South Wales, Platform 70 and Connect 100. And a lot of those people are still housed with us today, so which we're really, really proud of. So we know that safe, secure and affordable housing, or safe, secure and affordable home is the stable foundation that allows someone to live the life that they choose. So that's why at Bridge, obviously tenancy sustainment is our #1 priority. So this infographic is just a quick snapshot of our social impact framework, the difference we make. And it captures how all of the work that we do contributes to this overarching goal of supporting our residents to sustain their tenancies. So now, in the busy world of service delivery, staff, and rightly so, staff are quick to jump into action when a problem arises. And that's absolutely the right thing to do when it comes to responding to our clients, particularly, when crisis hits. But when it comes to addressing some of the more complex policy and practice problems, yeah, not so much. And sometimes that tendency to launch straight to the solutions can hinder some of that critical analysis and reflection, and mean that we are, that we're delivering interventions that are based on assumptions rather than evidence. So that's why it's so important to take an evidence-based approach when looking at how we can sort of improve our services. Particularly when it comes to these sort of bigger systemic issues. So, it starts with unpacking the problem at hand in detail to understand what's actually going on, what's the extent of the issue, what's the impact for us as an organisation, both in sort of dollar terms, in staff time, in client outcomes, what's the impact, who's impacted and how are they impacted. So we've been using nudge theory at Bridge Housing to help us work through these issues and to help us sort of design, test and implement solutions and process improvements that actually work and deliver better outcomes for our tenants. So what is nudge theory? So nudge basically says that the decisions we make are shaped by the context in which we make those decisions. So when faced with the same question and the same options, we'll make different decisions based on how the question's framed and how those options are sort of presented to us. So, our human brains are very responsive to things like positive reinforcement and indirect suggestion. And the way these are used can influence how we act in the decisions that we make in different scenarios. So nudge or behavioural insights is an approach that draws on the learnings from behavioural economics and social psychology to provide a framework for designing, testing and delivering improvements. So what's happening when someone's making a decision and how can we sort of reshape this decision-making context to influence that person to behave in the way that we need them to? it's almost like we're sort of hacking our own brains. And there's probably some, ethical considerations here. And yeah, there certainly are. I like to think about it, obviously, at Bridge Housing, we're working with people to provide housing. And so I think that, applying nudges to support people to sustain their tenancy is very different from, how nudge theory can be used in advertising and marketing to try and get people to buy things that they don't need. But yeah, if that's of interest, we can definitely pick that up, because I think there's a lot of ethical considerations in this space, which is really interesting to sort of unpack. But yeah, so one of the founding principles of nudge is really about taking an evidence-based approach to unpacking the problem at hand, designing targeted interventions, and then testing their effectiveness. So it's about delving into the problem, understanding what's going on, and designing a really specific intervention that addresses those factors that are at play. Then trialing it and actually looking at the evidence to make sure it works. And wow, that all sounds very labour intensive and time consuming. We're busy delivering services, I hear you all say. And yeah, it can be. But the benefit that we found is that these nudges really work. And by taking the time to understand the problem and to test the solution, we can be sure that we're implementing changes that work for staff and that work for our clients as well. So it's worth the time. Okay, so how does nudge work? So our brains use shortcuts called heuristics to help us make decisions under pressure. These heuristics take into account all of our previous experiences so that we aren't completely overwhelmed every time we need to make a choice. And there are some commonalities that are pretty sort of consistent across Western cultures. And just noting that, most of the research does come from Western cultures, particularly sort of US, and, most sort of social psychology experiments are, you've got your first year psych students at uni. So, acknowledging that's the context that a lot of this research sort of comes through. So people are lazy. We don't like to do things that take effort. Any amount of effort, even the tiniest bit, is a reason for us not to do something. As humans, our default is inaction. That being said, most people do want to do the right thing. We are amenable to that. But that just means that when it comes to sort of designing programs and services, we just need to make it easy for people to do the right thing, or to do the thing that we want them to. And another one is that most people just want to be like everyone else. We're social creatures, and fitting in with the pack is a long-standing survival instinct that we've carried through since not being part of the pack came with the very real risk of being eaten by a lion or something like that. And the people love to have fun, so pleasure is really motivating. Novelty makes things more fun, and having fun makes us feel good. Like, it's really just a no-brainer. And I've got some examples of some really great nudge theory sort of initiatives that use fun theory. I've got to have a theory name in there. So nudge theory is about taking these insights from all of this research on the human brain, from social psychology and behavioural economics, about how we interact, how we make choices, and then it's about applying them to service design. So where to start? There's a lot of research out there, but luckily for us, the Behavioural Insights team, which was established by the UK government to drive the application of nudge theory across government services over there, have distilled reams and reams of research into a very simple framework, and that's the EAST framework. So this is a framework that can be applied when designing new programs, processes, or approaches, and it can also be used as a framework for assessing existing ones in order to identify and test improvements to those processes. So EAST stands for easy, attractive, social, and timely. And these are the questions that we consistently come back to through the nudge project process. So easy, so people are more likely to take action the less effort it requires. So make it easy for the person to take the desired action through the use of default options and low barrier processes. People, we'd all know this one. So people are much more likely to pay their electricity bill if the electricity provider includes a link to make the payment in that reminder text message. We're all very busy, so any slight change that we can make to how we're interacting with our clients and with our staff as well, is likely to deliver significant results. So at Bridge Housing, what we've done is we've just, really simple. We've actually, set up all of our forms as web forms that are automatically optimized for phones and tablets. So this means that we can easily text someone a link and they can quickly, use, for example, our rent review form to take a photo and upload their pay slips easily. We've found it's also been the web forms have been particularly useful. Staff have them on their phones as well. So when they're out in the field, we find it can be particularly helpful for getting things like consent to disclose or consent to share information with a support provider when we're out in the field, and particularly in that sort of moment of, when clients are in crisis, it's you need to get things done really quickly, and we found that web forms are just super accessible. Someone can just sort of sign there, with their finger, and then that, we've got that on file. Attractive, so people are more likely to do something that draws their attention. So using colours, images, personalisation, and rewards can really sort of significantly increase uptake, or it can increase your response rate or engagement rate as well. So make it pretty, make it colourful, make it fun. So we're also very egotistical. So the research really clearly shows that we're significantly more likely to engage with something if we believe it's for us personally. So for example, you get a much higher open rate on envelopes that have been hand addressed compared to printed, because, oh, it's for me. It's not, some company sending me a letter and I'm just a number in the system. It's someone, another person is wanting to talk to me about something. And then social. So most people just want to be like everyone else. So pointing to the behaviour of similar people, sort of like leveraging social networks and relationships, and using commitment devices can increase uptake. So what's a commitment device? So people are more likely to follow through with an action if they've previously committed to it. So this can be done just through, and we've all got these, so confirmation text for appointments, or even just asking someone, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to make this repayment tomorrow, or, to attend this appointment with me, to take that action that we've agreed on. And then the last one is timely. So people are more or less receptive to particular decisions at different times. And it really just comes down to giving people what they need when they need it. And we've found that customer journey mapping, or even staff journey mapping, is a really great way to highlight those opportunities to improve the timeliness in your processes. As soon as you sort of map something out, you just immediately start going, oh, here we go. Here are some really low hanging fruit, and here are some ways that we could just make this work better for everyone. We're also more heavily influenced by immediate costs and benefits than those that will be delivered later. So it's important to remind people of the immediate costs and benefits that are directly relevant to them. And now here we've got some fun examples of nudges. So these ones have actually been highly effective. So on the left, you can see an ashtray, but it's not just any ashtray, it's a fun one. And people use their cigarette butt here to vote for who they think the best football player is. So the problem behaviour here was the littering of cigarette butts, and the results are really, really impressive. So there was a 76% decrease in cigarette litter following the installation of the fun bin. And that bin there is not going to cost you much more than your standard sort of bin. But with great results. And then on the right here, you can see some stairs, and there's actually a great video of this. It's really fun. So I might just pop that in the chat afterwards. So on the right, you can see that we've got some stairs to an escalator at a train station. So the problem here was how to encourage people to be more active and to take the stairs over the escalator. So with this whole idea of fun, they turn the steps into a giant piano, and each step actually plays a note when you step on it. What a novelty! So much fun. It was really great results. So the installation of the piano steps led to a 66% increase in people taking the stairs over the escalator, and you can see in the video people are literally just running up and down the stairs, just having a great time. So very good for public health. Great outcome for everyone. So how have we used nudge at Bridge? So, for us, I think a huge part of nudge has been the detailed problem analysis that happens before you actually start nudging anything. And I guess to support this, we've had quite a focus on actually building our data capacity. So I think, and I'm sure a lot of a lot of people in the room will resonate with you guys. There's so much data out there. We've got so much data, but actually pulling it together into any sort of useful form can be quite tricky. So, we've just been working on developing some reports that can really help us with the information that we need to design and test nudges. So what have we nudged? So our first project, we looked at property inspections. So when we looked at the data, we found that 23% of our tenants weren't providing us with access for their property inspection. And when we sort of got down into the detail, we worked out that this is coming at it with an annual cost of $73,000 a year for us as an organisation. Most of that is not a financial loss, it's a loss of staff time for our housing managers, who are the busiest people. They're that point of contact for our tenants. So, if we're losing their time, that's just not okay. And what can we do to sort of improve that? So what we did was we rewrote our letters, we updated our process, we've sort of implemented a new step where our staff now leave a thank you card. We've got a prize draw for people who, a monthly prize draw where we send out we send out a voucher. And so it's just some sort of positive reinforcement there around sort of providing access. And yeah, so we actually did a trial of this one. So we did not quite a randomized controlled trial because we don't quite have the numbers to do that. But what we did is we had a test cohort we had a control cohort and the intervention cohort. And we got a 90% access rate in the control and 100% access rate in the intervention cohort, which we were very, very surprised and impressed with, but that was fantastic. And we're sort of going, I don't know, how's this going to go when we roll it out? Maybe it was just a bit of a fluke. But, we've now had that process in place for over a year, and our access rate has increased from 77% to 95% across the organisation. So that's fantastic. And that's about a saving of, over sort of $60,000 a year in staff time, which is just fantastic. But the really interesting thing I think that came out of that project was around who wasn't giving us access. So naturally we jumped to the conclusion that it was our complex tenants, but actually we found it was the people we were least expecting. We were sort of, it's going to be the people with, complex mental health issues and blah, 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 blah. But actually we found it was our older English speaking women, often living on their own, no support services on file, no rent debt, living in higher density properties, and most of them were our tenants for more than 10 years. So these are not the people who usually pop up on our radar. But then we sort of go, oh, actually, those are the people who've got the most risk factors for hoarding. And what these clever tenants had actually learned is that they could fly under the radar year on year, and we're not going to follow them up with access orders because they're not raising any other red flags. We're just going to let them sort of go. So this has then also triggered a lot of other work that we've done around improving our response to tenants who are, who are experiencing hoarding, and how we can work more effectively with people. So, obviously you can't nudge hoarding because that's a really, really complex matter, but through this process, it's highlighted additional work that we've needed to do. We've also looked at our rent review process. So, we have to review people's rents twice a year, which involves a lot of people having to return forms and evidence of their income. So all we did here was create a web form to allow people to return that information a lot easier. We included a QR code in the letter that we sent to people, and we also streamlined that letter. Down from, about 500 words to about 150 words, and use more sort of icons and graphics. And then, sending text messages with a link to that form as well. Rolled out the changes, and it was great. So, as we can see there, so we've had a, significant increase in our return rate, and a drop in the number of tenants who are then being put on market rent for not returning those forms after a few months. And then finally, we've looked at how we can nudge people to, to pay their rent and to sort of reduce rent debt. And so as part of this, we've completely changed our letters and processes for responding to tenants with rental debt. So with a real focus on having those face-to-face conversations early on to prevent debt from escalating. And so one of the big things here was about nudging our staff. We found that actually staff, maybe don't have the skills or confidence to have those conversations. So we've rolled out a sort of a staff training program as part of this as well. Obviously there's a lot of shame around debt, so we need to be really careful how we manage this. But yeah, so we went live with the new process in May, and the plan was to do a pilot for 6 months and then do a comparison to the previous 6 months. But obviously there have been some pretty major increases in the cost of living, which is going to make it really hard to sort of, yeah, I guess test the effectiveness. But we've had really good feedback from staff and tenants. So, you know, so that's been really great. And so here's just jumping into just some examples of what we've done. So this was for the property inspection process here. So you can see that, you know, we're highlighting that the key information using sort of just formatting and icons, you know, we're reminding people of that their sort of the commitments that they've made as part of their tenancy, you know, drawing people's attention to the cost of not providing access. You know, using positive reinforcement, providing options, you know, really trying to make it easy for people to, you know, if they're not going to be available, please let us know so that we don't come out to your property and waste that time. We'll just rebook it. That's fine. And then this is just a quick screenshot from some of our letters in the rent payment space. So what we've done, you know, we've created a visual sort of escalation path. So all of our letters in this in the rental debt sort of space now follow this escalation path, so people can really clearly see where they're at on that trajectory. And that's just to really, you know, to provide that reassurance to people early on that, you know, we're not going to evict you. Please just get in contact with us and we'll work through a solution. You know, QR codes everywhere. We're very happy with our QR codes. All right, so yeah, so thanks for your time today. I just think Nudge provides a great framework for delivering some evidence-based service improvements. You know, the approach actually guarantees that they will work. And the simple nature of the nudges means that they can actually be really, really quick and cheap to implement from existing resources and time. So if you're interested in how you might be able to apply it, like really happy to have a conversation and to share some of our learnings with you and go through things in more detail. So yeah, there's my email, or just message me in the chat. But yeah, happy nudging.
Thanks very much, Ellis. Really, really fantastic and interesting presentation. Lots of food for thought. Thank you. So I will now throw to our next presenter, who's Carrie Hayter from Health Consumers New South Wales. So over to you, Carrie.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen with everyone. I need to share sound. It's just from the beginning. Great. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to present today. I too would like to acknowledge the Gadigal Wongal people of the Eora Nation, whose land I'm coming from today. I also want to acknowledge people with lived experience and consumers who are on this workshop today, and also all the wonderful consumers and incredible colleagues across Sydney Health Partners who I've had the privilege of working alongside, including a lot of academics and researchers from the University of Sydney in some of the work that we've been doing today. So the purpose of today is to really talk about the partnership that Health Consumers New South Wales has formed with Sydney Health Partners, talk a bit about what we've achieved throughout that journey, and also what lessons have we learned and hopes and aspirations for the future. I'm the Consumer Engagement Manager for Health and Medical Research for Health Consumers New South Wales, and my role is really to empower consumers to be actively involved in any health and medical research, but also connect and partner with universities and build their capability as well. So I work with both parts of the system. A bit about Health Consumers New South Wales. Last year we had our 10-year anniversary. We're an independent charity with 867 individual members and 66 consumer organisation members. And really our role is to promote and practice consumer involvement with health services and researchers to ensure that the consumer perspective is heard and amplified. And Sydney Health Partners, now normally Angela Todd would present on this, but Sydney Health Partners is an NHMRC accredited research translation centre that includes 4 major health services, the University of Sydney and a number of, and 11 medical research institutes. covers a very large area, serves over 2.7 million people, and currently has operational priorities around capacity and capability of researchers, especially in early career researchers, innovation, linking promising ideas to clinical priorities, research enabling, including building progress in governance on data sharing, consumer involvement in clinical trials support, and also impact in terms of advancing the science of research translation. So when we talk about consumer and community involvement in health and medical research, what are we talking about? So we talk about it as an active partnership between health consumers and researchers. So it's not just about, it's much more than participation in studies. It's involving people with lived experience and health consumers in all aspects of health and medical research. So why our partnership? What we wanted to do was to bring together researchers and consumers. So Sydney Health Partners has the research expertise. Health Consumers New South Wales has expertise in working with health consumers. And both of our organisations have a shared commitment to building the capacity of researchers and consumers to partner in research. Promoting and supporting good practices through tools and resources, and really talking about the how I do this work, and advocating for consumer and community involvement in all sorts of health and medical research beyond our partnership. One of the things we were very explicit when we started this work is we wanted to build on the evidence. So we have the National Health and Medical Research Council Statement on Consumer and Community Involvement in Health and Medical Research. Sydney Health Partners published some early work around involving consumers in health research with consultations that they did with consumers. What did they say? In 2017, Health Consumers New South Wales did a whole heap of work around involving health consumers in health and medical research around what are the enablers and challenges from a consumer perspective. And then the Australian Health Research Alliance did a big audit of consumer and community involvement in health and medical research. And also as well, we have also built on the work of the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute in terms of their consumer and community involvement framework, which is an incredibly comprehensive framework that is evidence-based, and it also talks about the stages of the research, but also the different components that you need to build an ecosystem of consumer and community involvement across a whole network of organisations. So we partnered with Sydney Health Partners from 2019. What we did in 2019-20, we did a mapping of consumer and community involvement in Sydney Health Partners. So we wanted to work out what's happening in Sydney Health Partners. Where are people at? We did a survey where we had 168 respondents from Sydney Health Partners. We also did interviews with stakeholders and people sharing lots of experiences and stories of consumer and community involvement, as well as what are some of the enablers, but also what are some of the barriers. And then we brought a whole bunch of consumers and researchers and clinicians together and ran a stakeholder workshop to talk about, well, what does this all mean? That then informed the development of introductory training, which we have been rolling out since 2019-2020. And as part of that project, we ran 3 2-hour online sessions for consumers and researchers and clinicians. And in that, we are explicitly bringing those different stakeholders together, consumers and researchers and clinicians together, to create shared meaning, shared understanding, so that we can further the involvement of consumers in the community in health and medical research. And there's a link to the report that you can actually have a look at. What we did in those stakeholder interviews, we unearthed a whole heap of wonderful stories and examples. And I just want to play one video to you now, which was a wonderful example of this.
What are the benefits of consumer involvement in research? When Sue Curl asked her patients about a novel idea she had to prevent hip fractures, she unexpectedly became a pioneer.
There was a light bulb moment, but I didn't actually realise it at the time. I did my PhD on the use of hip protectors, shields in underwear that sit over the hip, so if you fall over you don't break your hip. I went first to older ladies to see what sort of underwear they would wear with the shields in them, and I didn't think of it as involving consumers. They told me so much, whether it was the colour, the waistband, just how it would look. We ended up with very nice underwear, and the ladies said that's what they would wear.
Mary Potter is also a pioneer. A medical researcher in her youth, she combined her training with personal experience of cancer to become an in-demand research contributor.
I wasn't scared of bureaucracy, or shall we say I wasn't scared of authority. And also my family were all medicos. And I felt, well, what I know is as important as what you know. But I also happen to know a little bit about what you know as well.
It was the patients that gave me the idea, in a way, not me. So the ideas were initiated, and then we talk to them and say, well, how would you do this? Would you be happy if someone asked you all these questions? Would you be happy to be reviewed every 3 months, 6 months? Would you be happy to fill out a questionnaire on falls or daily function? So we involved them without even realising that that was consumer involvement. This was 25 years ago.
I think what's changed things is the change in the quality standards with accreditation for hospitals and university work, ethics committees. So you've still got the ticker box people, but you've got those who actually really believe in the value of input from people who've experienced the illnesses that they're investigating.
There are still cynics who say, why do we need consumers? And I always say you need consumers, you need clinicians, and you need researchers. You can research something, but it's the clinicians that are going to do it to the participants, to in this case, older people. If you don't have them all in the tent, it will not work. Seeing the tick box makes me really annoyed, mainly because I think the researchers who do that are being foolish. They are really ignoring a very, very important part of their research process.
Consumers can tick a box as much as a research group can, and so it's really important that if you take on it's a responsibility, that you do the best that you're able to do.
I think we have to really, really push the benefits of consumer involvement, not just to the research, but to the consumers themselves. It's really fun to be involved.
So there were lots of examples that we unearthed through that stage 1 project, but we're now onto a stage 2 project. And what we're doing is building on that work that we did in 2019, 2020. We're currently developing a consumer and community involvement principles and framework that's been co-created by consumers, researchers and clinicians. And in that, we've got 4 domains to build consumer and community involvement across Sydney Health Partners, which includes governance, leadership, capacity building and infrastructure. And what it does is it's adapted and built on the work of the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute, as well as the Australian Health Research Alliance. What we're trying to do is build an ecosystem of resources and support for researchers and consumers, and a number of things that we're currently developing. So we know, for example, there's a lot of contested language in this space. So we are developing a consumer and community involvement language guide. Also, a remuneration and reimbursement guide for consumers, which consumers and researchers will be able to use as a guide if you want to involve consumers in your research. How should they be remunerated and how should they be paid? And also we're building on the training. So we've got the introductory course, but we're also going to be doing an intermediate how to face-to-face training with Sydney Health Partners as well. And currently we're also developing a prototype for a consumer and community involvement database where we can match consumers and researchers together who are interested in collaborating, which is hosted by Health Consumers New South Wales. The other thing that's happening with Sydney Health Partners is there's a new consumer advisory panel for Sydney Health Partners. It's a subcommittee of the board of Sydney Health Partners. It's got 13 consumer representatives, and that work is really building on the principles and the framework for Sydney Health Partner, and also providing guidance to the board of Sydney Health Partner around how do we progress this forward in terms of consumer and community involvement. The other, as part of this partnership, the other piece of work we are doing, we've created a statewide network of consumer voices in clinical trials in New South Wales. They've called the Conviction Group, and it was funded by the New South Wales Office for Health and Medical Research, and we've got 14 incredible consumers from across New South Wales who are working collaboratively. What we're doing is currently developing 3 resources which have been written by consumers for consumers: a video showcasing diverse consumer stories and their views and experiences of clinical trials, an infographic, and a clinical trial checklist. And we anticipate that these will be released in November. So what have we achieved through this strategic partnership? Our partnership is operating at many levels. We've got the strategic partnership between Sydney Health Partners and Health New South Wales, but also operationally in terms of the Stage 2 Steering Committee, where we've got consumers, researchers and clinicians on that, the Consumer Advisory Panel for Sydney Health Partners, but also the work of the Conviction Group. And equally as well, we're focusing on, the contract that Health Consumers has with Sydney Health Partners to deliver on what we said we do, but also politically in terms of our efforts to influence New South Wales Health and others around, how do we continue to amplify and emphasise the absolute critical role of consumers and the community in health and medical research. What have we learnt through this? Well, the process of involvement and engagement takes time. It takes time to do this work. As we said, we've got a number of working groups created and structures. It's really important to have clear purpose of those groups. I often talk about that when we're bringing consumers and researchers and clinicians to get together, we can only work at the speed of trust. And we also need to have a process of reflective listening and sometimes just pausing and listening to all the voices in the system and see what comes out of that. One of the things that we've done as well, we've amplified the consumer voice on working groups and committees, and sometimes it means that we've got larger numbers of consumers rather than researchers on these committees. And always we're creating opportunities for consumers and researchers to come together, to collaborate, to learn from each other and create shared meanings and understandings of what it does. One of the things about when you're building an ecosystem, which is what we're doing with Sydney Health Partners, of consumer and community involvement, it's got both technical and adaptive leadership elements. So there's a whole heap of technical skills around how do you do this, but then there's a leadership piece around how do we convince the people, the hearts and minds, particularly of those who are more resistant to this, as to why they need to do it and how can we all be leaders in this space. I think one of the things that we've been quite good at is we've got an incredible network of consumers, researchers who we're working with and clinicians in this project. And so that's created like a holding environment to help us do this adaptive leadership work. And also I think it's really important to have clear governance processes as well. One of the other challenges and things that we've learnt is that we need to appeal to the diversity of health and medical research across Sydney Health Partners. There's incredible diversity in the research that's done, as well as the diversity of consumer and researcher experiences. So we need to have lots of range of different stories and examples and tools that can actually help You know, people, for example, doing clinical trials in cancer, or those people who maybe are doing a lived experience research project with people living with mental health issues. So there's incredible diversity. There are some challenges, I think, in engaging basic science researchers in understanding why consumer involvement is important and how do you actually do that. And equally, I think it's really important that we can continue to build on the evidence base. There's already a lot of evidence base in this space, but we really need to develop some simple measures to demonstrate impact and change across systems. So what are we hoping for the future? Well, I suppose both of our aspirations are a health system where good consumer and community involvement is embedded in all research projects, and research does not get funded without demonstrated involvement. So we're moving away from a ticker box to you actually have to show how you do this. I mean, I think there are, you know, things are moving, things are changing. If you look at the NHMRC guidelines, the Medical Research Futures Fund guidelines, it is changing, but there's still more that we could do. Community involvement in health and medical research, and a big shout out to the Neighbourhood Research Hub. How do we involve the community? We talk about involving consumers, but there's a broader piece that we need to do around when we talk about community, who we're talking about and how do we involve them. And I suppose as well, we'd like to see a national network of consumers, researchers and clinicians who want to foster and support CCI and health and medical research. We are looking, Health Consumers New South Wales is looking at what we can do at a state level, but it'd be great if there was a national network. And also more mentoring and training of consumers. Currently, there's lots of consumers who are involved in health services design and health service evaluation, but wouldn't it be wonderful if consumers, whatever role they want to play in this, they're supported to either be involved in research or be involved in health services or play both roles when they want it to happen. I just want to acknowledge Angela Todd, and Linda Comerack, my colleagues from Sydney Health Partners who have been working alongside, and Anthony Brown from Health Consumers New South Wales. And there's some more references there. The top one is an interesting publication from Sydney Local Health District, a local one, for if you're interested in, you know, some of the research about engaging consumers in health research. And I think that's it. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Carrie, for that, and very much following on from our previous themes from the previous NGO Researchers Forum around the importance of co-design and engagement with people with lived experience from the beginning. So thank you for that insight. I'll now hand over to Laura Butler from Westia for our next presentation. Thanks, Laura. Having trouble hearing you, Laura. Can't hear you, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Awesome. That was a close one. We've got it though. Good one. Thank you, Elise. Okay, good one. So yeah, good morning all. It's a real pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to speak to the forum today. So my name is Laura Butler and I'm a social researcher at Westia Limited. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining today from unceded Darug land in the Blue Mountains here. And as brief background, Westia, or Western Sydney Regional Research and Information Service, is a small non-profit community research organisation. We're based in Parramatta. And Westia actually has been operating for over 40 years, and we're largely funded by the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. So we publish papers on census demographics in Western Sydney, as well as special interest topics. And these are just two examples of recent papers we've published that are available on our website. But today I'll be talking about a project we undertook last year in 2021. Great. So I'd like to acknowledge that this was a passion project of a former colleague of mine who's since moved to another organisation, Amy Lawton, who is a co-author, as well as Parissa Kalali, who is the other co-author of this research. And the aim of this project that we undertook was to really understand the current state of the service system for survivors of institutional child sexual abuse through the perceptions and experiences of service staff in relevant non-profit organisations operating in Greater Western Sydney. And these organisations included community services and legal services. The project sought to understand how things have changed since the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. And our focus, as I said, was on services that are operating in GWS, so local, as well as larger services that happen to be operating more locally as well. And we had several objectives that are listed here on the slide, so including looking at how services are addressing survivor needs, how COVID has impacted service delivery, and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the service system. So today, while I will mention some of what we found in this research, as this is a researchers forum, so I'll be speaking a bit more about on the process that we took, with the hope that there might be some lessons or ideas that people can draw from our experience with this project. And so the research summary and full report is available on our website. So I'll also use some QR codes that the others mentioned as well, like them as well, so you can access the full reports there. So today I'll be talking about what we did, so what our process was, how we did it, the methodology we took, what were the key findings, and throughout what lessons arose that might be helpful for people joining today. So what did we do? So to start off with, we developed a research proposal that was considered and approved by our board. This proposal covered things such as the research background, the aims, and a plan for the methodology, as well as a budget for hours and resources, of course. And another part of the research proposal, which was critical throughout the whole project, was ethical considerations and values. So as researchers, of course, like we seek to do no harm and to act with respect and kindness and beneficence, so where the benefits of a research project outweighing the potential harms. And even better, we want to be ensuring that the work we do will have a benefit for the population that we're working with. So there's a lot to consider when planning for and conducting ethical social research. So to this end, I wanted to highlight a paper that Westia have actually published last year. 2020 goes fast. That's also publicly available on our website. And this is providing a checklist and kind of guiding framework for research and evaluation in nonprofits. So this can be accessed also by this QR code and is available for all online. And as discussed in this paper, there's a number of standards to uphold when conducting research with people. So key examples being the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Research Involving Humans from the National Health and Medical Research Council. This council also provides the Code for Responsible Research Conduct and Ethical Conduct in Research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities, which are communities with histories of being over-researched and where without adequate care, unequal power dynamics can unfortunately still come into play. And there are, of course, a number of more guidelines, but you can access the paper if you're looking for some more info on that. So as I mentioned earlier, so our project was approved by our board, but it is worth noting, and this is something I've only learned recently, that it is possible to apply to human research ethic committees at universities as an external applicant. So there may be costs involved in this, but I've provided some links if that's of interest to anyone. Definitely worth considering. So what I want to point to now is that ethics, while of course interested in protecting participants, also involves procedures to ensure that researchers are protected. So many of you will be familiar with the concept of vicarious trauma, which refers to the harmful changes that occur in a professional's view of themselves, others, or the world as a result of exposure to the graphic and or traumatic material of their clients. And it can be something encountered in a range of scenarios and is something that the participants of this research we conducted really discussed that was facing them and their colleagues. So yeah, we actually found that a lot of the organisations working in this space of supporting survivors of abuse were very attuned to vicarious trauma, with a lot of support and training efforts focused on self-care, plus supervision made available. But even so, both community and legal organisations that we spoke with did describe seeing workers coming in to their role and then going out the other end traumatised from what they've heard from working with clients. So just highlighting some gaps that are still there in those support settings for staff as well. And as researchers, when you're a researcher and you're working with such sensitive topic areas, possibly with survivors or people who have been traumatised, it's important to put in place processes to prevent vicarious trauma among research teams as well. So what do we do in this regard? So to start off with, before engaging any interviews or workers, we familiarise ourselves with work and issues in this field. So the researchers undertook a literature review and also completed an online training course on working with adult survivors of child sexual assault. So while we weren't working with survivors, it helped us to have that kind of comfort and awareness of in the back of our mind that we're confident in the field that we're working in. And the language we're using is correct as well. So with COVID, our organisation also had an employee assistance program available, EAP. And this was something encouraged frequently with information shared and talked about within our research team as being available. And as new employees joined the research team, this was also important to highlight that was there. And to some, so working with clients or perhaps a more involved project, this might extend to professional supervision. So we also had that open channel of communication and acknowledged amongst each other as researchers, but also with our manager, recognising the fact that this was a tough topic to, spend your days thinking about. So we need to be there to support each other or support each other to find assistance elsewhere, such as through the EAP. And to this end, there is also the need for self-awareness and flexibility. So with self-awareness and supporting colleagues through doing this work, we had to acknowledge that when working with really sensitive and potentially traumatizing topics, it's not going to be the same as working with, say, quantitative or statistical data. So sometimes in a day you might be looking at stats and you think I can just push through this, but for longevity, that's not always possible or helpful in a scenario where you're working with such traumatic and serious kind of topics. So there are times you have to think, have that awareness of yourself and when it would be helpful to step away, take a breath and look at some other projects and other things. And aligned with this is also the fact that, of course, everyone's different and you don't know the people's histories or own trauma. So it's important to work with that assumption that people have their own private worlds and can opt out or take a break and be comfortable. And on this topic, I just wanted to highlight a brief article that I think is enormously valuable in this situation or any situation when you're doing research, researching topics that can be confronting or traumatizing. So this article called Doing Sustainable Trauma Research by Dr. Michael Salter at Western Sydney University. I've included a screenshot here. So if you want to have a look at it, it's only a couple of pages long, but he identifies some of these things I've discussed so far. So self-reflection, ethical commitment, and self-care. So self-care, Dr. Salter sees to include professional supervision, mindfulness practices, accepting mistakes, and also connection and having agility and enrichment. So connection, he argues, is important because trauma is characterized by a severing of ties with others. So having that connection can, help avoid negative impacts. And to be agile means to have other things that you can turn to. So perhaps you can do in a break or another project you can work on. And just to finish as well on this topic with Dr. Salter, just a quote from him, the advice to make sure that your life outside work feels more substantive and weighty than your life inside work. And that researchers in trauma should make sure they're not compromising their own quality of life while they're helping trauma survivors to find theirs. It's a great article, highly recommend it. Okay, so how did we do this research that we've now published? So because our goal was to understand experiences and perceptions rather than classifying or measuring something, this research took a qualitative approach. So it involved conducting a total of 15 interviews with 21 participants. So some were group interviews and some were solo, all done online via Zoom or Microsoft Teams because it was in the midst of lockdowns. So the interviews were semi-structured, so we had a number of questions that we had prepared to ask, but this was flexible based on how the conversation flowed. And this helped with comparison when we were analysing the transcripts, but it didn't overly limit the directions of what we were talking about. And we also gathered some demographic information on the participating services through ACNC data that's publicly available. So about organisation size and funding levels and sources and things like that. So I wanted to just mention this kind of tension, this age-old tension between qualitative and quantitative research methods. So anyone like us who is working to record their impact or maybe report it on something like DEX or something, will know that the priority really is placed on quantitative records. And that's something that's really been entrusted in a way that's seen as the most reliable measure, and is kind of celebrated for how it can be generalized or applied across context. But so generalizability is not really a priority in qualitative research, where we're focusing on context and really understanding what's happening in a situation, particularly in a small scale study like we conducted here. So just another quote from an article on this topic. So qualitative studies are not generalizable in the traditional sense of the word. They, of course, have other redeeming features which make them highly valuable. So their mission being to discover meaning and understanding rather than to verify truth or predict outcomes. So to take a light turn, I just had to include this image, of course. So this might be what you might think about quantitative and qualitative research. Yeah. So when you're really, I guess, gathering and producing such vivid accounts through qualitative work, such as Elton John here, one challenge you may encounter, which I think we did, was the scale of insight offered through interviews and through listening to participants. So you gather such a significant amount of information, so then it's a matter of finding the themes that are emerging in that. So now I just want to briefly outline what we did find through our thematic analysis, drawing out the key themes and trends in the interviews. So what do we find? So I just touch on 4 themes. So we identified the services that nonprofit, community and legal organisations provide in GWS to survivors of child sexual abuse. So this includes therapeutic support, both to survivors and perpetrators, support to access redress, so the National Redress Scheme, prevention activities, advice or referral, community legal education and outreach, as well as law and policy reform work and case management. We also found that COVID-19 had mixed impacts on delivery of services. So many organisations needed, of course, to shift online. Some did keep face-to-face contact throughout lockdowns, but that online shift meant that access for some clients was broadened, while others found it more limiting. So yeah, that face-to-face connection was really highlighted as being important for doing this traumatic, really intense work. So organisations talked about how they adapted mechanisms for the safety of staff and clients as they faced challenges in undertaking, say, community outreach, or even allaying fears from clients about whether their National Redress Scheme payments would go through, or if that funding would be lost because of the COVID situation. Great. So furthermore, client demographics and needs were wide-ranging. So practitioners we interviewed noted that awareness about child sexual abuse had risen since the Royal Commission finished, but client needs had stayed quite consistent. And there was also some concern that because the Royal Commission is now out of the news and it's concluded, that survivors may not know that support is still available to them. So that's something I just wanted to reiterate today. So this, National Redress Scheme, these supports are still available to survivors out there. And participants also noted the need for holistic multidisciplinary support to meet client complex needs. So highlighting the importance of incorporating client voices and lived experience, plus collaboration across organisations. And the final theme emerging really was about service gaps and challenges. So including the need for more long-term service funding, identifying the difficulty of navigating across service systems. So more services were needed for sexual assault victims and perpetrators. And there was also an issue we identified that that participants identified of what they called survivor farming, of private legal firms recruiting survivors and getting financial gain through that. And workforce issues were also highlighted, so including the need for ongoing trauma-informed training, external supervision, and having a healthy workplace culture. So in summation, so what are the key lessons we might draw from this for future research, and what are the key takeaways we found? So I just thought I'd just reiterate a few things. So one, the importance of ethics and safety considerations for both our research participants as well as researchers. The involvement of boards in ethical approval, but also the possibility of engaging those external ethic committees for expert guidance. Valuing what qualitative research can offer, and understanding that depth of insight where voices of participants are centred, while it is limited in generalisability, which is often prioritised, the targeted and focused context of that work can be incomparably rich. And finally, for the community sector, great things are being done to support survivors of child sexual abuse. Though as our research found, there are opportunities still for improvement in that field. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. That was, again, really insightful. I can see from the chat that I think most people really appreciated the image representation of qual versus quant research.
Okay,
so
good.
thanks for including that in
No
there.
worries, thank you.
Yeah, look, I'm really happy to open it up to everyone online now to, if anyone has any questions for any of the presenters or any sort of comments that they want to contribute to the discussion, now's your chance to speak up. Feel free to just jump in, or you can put your hand up as well and we can throw to you. So I'll leave it open to the group now in case anyone wants to ask any questions.
Can we have the slide off so we can see more people if that's possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
And we'll just remove that as well.
Actually, Kerry, it's Margaret Tippy here from Westia. I was interested, hi. I was lucky enough to get the NCOSS Member of the Year award last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I finally got to Melbourne a couple of weeks ago to get it. But I actually gave a presentation on the issue around getting into the ethical area and relating it to human, because I actually find sometimes the animal area is harder than humans. But what I said was sometimes I think we, as consumers, that you're actually really desperate. And I've actually called it desperation consent for when people are offered, if they've got a sick, I use the example of a sick child, that we want to try this treatment because it could actually save them. And so I said, I don't really think it's informed consent. I think it's desperation consent. So I just wanted to share that because I'm interested to see if that's what you sometimes think comes through.
Look, I think the issue of, there's a whole paper we could present on involving consumers and the community in research and how and educating ethics committees about that. So one of the, I think in the last forum, there was a team of the researchers with lived experience that I've got the privilege of working alongside. And so I think there's some of the assumptions, just talking from a research perspective, some of the assumptions, we need ethical frameworks to keep people safe, to keep researchers safe. I don't dispute that, but some of getting some of this, when you're working on really trying to amplify the voices of consumers in involvement in research, there are challenges sometimes. You need to educate ethics committees about that. And so I think there's a whole conversation we need to have. For example, like some of the assumptions when you have to write ethics applications around the capacity of people to consent,